Welcome to the College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line. Here's Shehan J. Haraja and Bobak Hayeri.
Hey everybody, it's the College Football Survivor Show. I'm Bobak Hayeri with my co-host Shehan J. Haraja, national college football writer for CBS Sports. We're glad to have you with us. Today continues our tour examining all the teams who might be a 12-team playoff contender. We've already covered the ACC, Big 12, and Big 10, as well as 9 G5 teams to watch. But be sure, if you can, to check out those previous episodes if you haven't already. Today, we're continuing our look at the Group of 5, taking a slightly deeper peek at each conference. Again, starting this season, at least one G5 conference champ will be in the college football playoff, so it's worthwhile to see who might emerge. Before we dive in, let me remind you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show, where we have video highlights of the show, run polls, and listen to your feedback. Please take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you find your podcast. So once again, just to remind everyone, playoff is going to be 12 teams from, at least for the next 2 seasons. It's a 5+7 model. So the top 5 conference champs plus 7 at-large teams. Among the 5 conference champs, the highest 4 teams will be the top 4 seeds in the CFP playoff bracket and get first-round byes. The assumption is the vast majority of years, strength of schedule and teams overall will give those top 4 spots to the P4 champs. So it would be the Big 10, SEC, Big 12, and ACC. Now, the highest-ranked G5 champ will also be in the mix. Most years, they'll be the 12 seed, but as Cincinnati proved, you can occasionally see them climb higher than normal. So there could be a year, they'll be one of the teams to get that first-round bye. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Today's format is going to be a little different. We're going to be actually, again, looking at each conference. And we're even going to open up with the independents. But before we get to that, Sean, why don't you explain to us, how are we breaking each conference down?
Sure. So we're running through each of the Group of 5 conferences. That's the American Conference USA, MAC, Mountain West, and Sun Belt. And we're picking 3 teams from each conference. And some of our teams might overlap. We might have them in different categories even. But I think that more than anything, this is just a way for us to try to just tell you what should you be paying attention to in these leagues. So we took 9 teams from different conferences and put them as part of our initial college football playoff kind of contender preview, ranked all of those teams. So those teams are off the board. We're not considering Boise State. We're not considering Memphis, et cetera, et cetera. Out of the rest of the teams, we're going to each pick 3 from each conference. And one of them is going to be a dark horse contender, one who maybe can, on the upside, potentially make the conference championship game, maybe win, maybe get into that playoff discussion even. Then in the middle, we have our Chaos Agents. That's a team that maybe is not rated very highly going into the season, who either can completely shake up the race by pulling an upset, or potentially a team that could also break their way and shockingly get into the conversation. And then the last one is a group that I'm calling the People's Champion, which is a team that probably doesn't have a whole lot of ability to get into any real relevance, I guess you could say. But I think that for varying reasons, we should still refer to them and talk about them. And what I'd be thinking with that is like a team that maybe is doing a lot of exciting stuff that may be like, oh, this is a program that you need to be paying attention to because in 1 or 2 years, something cool could be happening. Maybe they got a great player. Maybe they've got a great coach. Maybe they've got a fun story. It's really up to us. Again, a team that's probably not going to have any chance to win a whole lot of games this year, but that's only one part of the equation when we're talking on the College Football Survivor Show.
Love it. This is going to be fun. So again, just to remind everyone who's listening, the 9 teams we're not going to be talking about, we'll probably reemphasize it after each conference: Boise State, Liberty, Memphis, Fresno State, App State, Toledo, Tulane, UTSA, and South Florida were teams we talked about in our last episode. Those are the 9 that we thought perhaps had some of the best chances at breaking into the first college football playoff, 12-team playoff. But we'll go ahead and start this off. We thought, before we get into each G5, we thought it would be fun first to address the group that is kind of neither fish nor fowl, the Pac-2 and the Independents, which is not a band, surprisingly. Should be, though. So we've got what's left of the Pac-12, Oregon State and Wazoo, and the Independence teams, which are slowly shrinking. Now, Notre Dame isn't going to be part of this conversation. We already talked about them in our ACC show. We already made them a college football playoff contender among the P4. But that leaves us, again, Army's now in the Americans. So we're only left with UConn and UMass. So we've got 4 teams to talk about. It might be a stretch to kind of, so 3 of them are going to be slotted into this. So, and it's kind of funny because what do we had this conversation because next season we'll only have 1 independent plus Notre Dame, and because UMass is going to be in the MAC next season. So when I was looking at this, I just want to get one out of the way. I actually wanted to almost slot UMass as being my chaos agent because they are playing all of the strong MAC teams. And next season, they're going to be in the MAC. So they are basically the bonus MAC chaos agent because they could go on the road and upset Miami of Ohio, upset NIU, and or upset Toledo. Now, I'm not going to claim that they're going to go on the road and upset Georgia or, again, I love Mizzou is going to play them there, and it's still scheduled as a home game on their campus. They're not moving it to Gillette yet or anything like that. That is going to be wacky. But I just don't know. I don't necessarily think they're going to go on the road and beat Mississippi State. But if I'm thinking of a chaos agent out of these 4 teams, UMass could honestly ruin a lot of teams' days in the MAC by just going there. Because let's say they go and they beat Toledo. Suddenly, if Miami of Ohio beats Toledo, if NIU beats Toledo, they're going to look worse because that was the team that lost to UMass. UMass has the absolute way to ruin the MAC state unless they lose those games.
Well, I think I think that they're definitely going to ruin some days. They might maybe be more the fans of UMass, I think, whose days might be ruined when they go through and play these games. This is not a very good football team right now. I want to touch on UConn for a second because, like we talked about, outside of Notre Dame, they are the only team that long-term at the moment is planning to be an independent team. And we're starting to see, I mean, like UMass is like, oh boy, like we did our stint in the MAC before, didn't like it, but like we cannot be independent right now. This is a bad idea to try to be independent because you have no access to anything. Well, UConn's going to try that. And by the way, Oregon State and Washington State, I think that everybody kind of assumes after 2 years of existing and collecting as many checks as possible, they're probably just going to join the Mountain West so that they gain access to the playoff as well. But like UConn's just kind of there. And long term, they're just kind of there. And you look at their schedule, I mean, at Maryland, at Duke, like they don't really play a team that could even impact the playoff race in any way, either in the Group of 5 or in the Power 5.
That needs to be their season slogan. UConn 2024. We're just there.
That's what it feels like, right? Like it feels like they're just kind of vibing along, and I mean, it's like at least UMass was able, like you said, to schedule some games so that like their fans could be like, "Hey, that's cool. That's what a cool football team looks like." And UConn doesn't even like have any of those games. They have some programs that I love and I'm fascinated by, but I don't think that UConn fans are going to be beating down doors because they get to go see Fran Brown at Syracuse. Like, we'll be excited about that. I don't think that their fans are going to care all that much. And look, maybe it just like doesn't matter because all the money is going into the basketball teams anyway. And so, but then again, like, I don't know, just why are you even fielding a football team at the FBS level at this point if you're going to do that?
Isn't that what kept UMass independent? I want us to say that because didn't UMass's basketball team originally have a lot of cachet? Because they were which conference were they in for basketball?
I think they were in the A10, was it? And Calipari took them to the Final Four. They wanted to like try to be part of this thing long term. I mean, again,
because that was the big issue, wasn't it? The MAC wanted them to join in all sports, and they were like, "Nah, we're not doing that."
No, we're not playing MAC basketball with with all of y'all. Absolutely not. I think that this is going to be something that programs in general have to try and be serious about, which is do we actually care enough to play FBS football? What is the point of this? What are we doing here if we're not going to invest in it in any way? If we're going to be the only team in the country, because this is what it will be. This is legitimately what it will be. In 2 years, UConn will be the only team in the entire nation without a pathway to the playoff. The only one. Every other one will have an actual path. We can argue about how likely it'll be, but they have a path. UConn has no pathway to the playoff. And so at a certain point, when you are floating through life to that extent, I think that you need to ask some serious questions about what you're doing there. Anyway, that's life as an independent these days if you're not Notre Dame. I think that's a great way to wrap up that segment.
Well, I do want to say UConn really does kind of get to look at the idea of college football and whether or not people are willing to buy the system that existed before the BCS, which is a lot of teams just simply didn't have any shot at competing for. Because we were talking about it before we started recording this episode. UConn would have to somehow win enough games to finish in the top 11. And it's hard to look at their schedules and think that's ever going to happen. I mean, this season they play at Maryland, at Duke, at Syracuse, and they host Wake Forest when we're talking about P4 programs. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that'll be enough. And again, do you want to do that? Do you want to alienate your fan base by scheduling games that are impossible to win? Like, I don't know. It's a tough one, and UConn is a hard one to see. Now, just really quick before we completely leave this area, Oregon State and Wazoo do deserve, I think, some conversation. And when I was looking at all four teams, again, UConn, UMass, Oregon State, and Wazoo, I thought they've lost a lot of talent. But Washington State, I think, of these three, has the best chance of somehow climbing up. I don't think Oregon State does, only because the Civil War is still on the schedule, and Oregon is going to absolutely, well, who am I saying? We've seen Oregon State upset the Ducks when you just don't expect that to happen. And it's early enough in the season now that who knows, maybe a week 3 Civil War could completely cause that chaos. And they are playing in Razor Stadium. But Washington's enough of a rebuilding project that I'm not as scared of that game. I think the Apple Cup also in week 3 will be an interesting one to see. They have mostly a Mountain West schedule with the way this deal has worked out. Texas Tech as well, and that'll be an interesting game to see because Texas Tech we're trying to see if they'll turn it around after a disappointing 2023 season. It'll be an interesting one to see. I think of all the teams, Wazoo theoretically, I think if they were to win out, and I think this is a schedule where if a lot of things have to fall their way, but they're not. We've seen teams do more with do things like that before. They would actually have the biggest chance of breaking into the top 11.
No, I think that's fair. And I think the other piece of this, too, is that they have a legitimate chance of going on the road and beating a Boise State on September 28th and actually shaking up the Mountain West playoff conversation. The big difference between these two teams, and a big part of this is driven by the fact that Jake Dickert is back as head coach, whereas Jonathan Smith left. They are more in the 50s when it comes to returning production, whereas Oregon State, you're talking about a team that is, I believe, 128th in returning production. That's obviously a brutal position to be in as an Oregon State fan, but that's kind of just reality right now. So I think that I feel better about Washington State out of the independents, but the pathway to contention is still pretty far.
Losing Cam Ward didn't help. Losing Cam Ward did not help at all.
Not at all.
All right, but now let's go ahead and start looking at a couple of these conferences. So the first one is the team that is a part of the conference that we liked the most last week, because several of their teams were already off. We're not going to be talking about the arguably the top three teams in it, but the American. Historically, they have been the conference to challenge for the spot and potentially even break in. They had the Cincinnati season that we all saw. Now, of course, they're no longer there. They've lost many of their greatest teams now to the Big 12, and they even lost the best one last year to the ACC. Who are you ranking where? And this is interesting too. We had a little bit of discussion about this. How we define dark horse versus what we've now defined as the people's team. So now I'm kind of looking at them. I think I like my pick still here. Who's your dark horse?
Well, I want to know if we can go back to Tuesday's show and change it up, because by the way, the top 5 teams in the AAC standings from last season are not eligible for us to be picked because 4 of them are on our list of contenders and the other is SMU. So there's only 2 teams left in the entire conference that finished 500 in conference play last year. That is insane. Anyway, yeah, this was probably one of the tougher conferences for me to try to evaluate because of just all of the changes and all of the moving around. And I mean, I mentioned it on last week's show. It's like there's some interesting teams at the top, and who boy, there are some mediocre teams at the middle and the bottom when it comes to this conference. I'm actually going to start with my people's champion, and I'm like don't look too close, but Tulsa's kind of like doing some stuff. Like Tulsa's kind of taking this football thing seriously. They actually had one of the best group of 5 recruiting classes in all of the group of 5, 75th overall, including both high school and transfer players. A couple of really interesting guys, including Jeremiah Ballard, the wide receiver from UTEP, Cooper Legas as a quarterback from Utah State, Chris Thompson as a linebacker coming in from USC. So like these are legit players who I think will be able to step in and contribute right away. They were very targeted with who they decided to go after. And like when you look at some of these players that in the 247 rankings in terms of their high school kids, they've got like 5 kids who are rated an 88 or an 89, which that is a player who usually would be playing at the power conference level in terms of quality of recruits. So a lot of credit to them for being able to pull some stuff together to make things interesting, I'd argue, in a lot of ways. And so I don't know if it's this year that it comes together, right? But I do think that this is a really, really interesting group. I think this has been a program that's been plagued by just not caring in so many ways, and not investing at the level that they need to. It's a school that has a decent amount of money, but very little of that money actually goes to football for a variety of reasons. I mean, people don't realize this. Tulsa, even though it's Tulsa University, it is actually a private school in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's not a state institution. It's not a public school. And so they kind of have to do their own stuff in a lot of ways. One other thing to watch is, again, Tulsa, a program that hasn't invested at a high level historically. They just hired a new athletic director, Justin Moore. He was basically the number 2 at Texas A&M, which, if you know anything about Texas A&M, they are the fundraising kings of college football. And so I'm going to be fascinated to see if that can be transformational for them in a lot of ways. So I'm not saying that Tulsa's going to be good this year, or that they're going to beat somebody awesome, but like, I don't know. They only went 4-8 last year. It wasn't a disaster by any means. So just keep a little bit of an eye on Tulsa.
That's not a bad pick at all. And I think Tulsa's an interesting school for the exact same reason you realized. You mentioned they are one of the smallest FBS programs out there. I remember, like, I walked the Rice campus after the national championship last year, and they're also small. And I did not believe how small that campus was when I walked in. I'm like, this school feels an FBS program. Then you walk in this stadium and it kind of feels like a high school stadium. You're kind of like, okay, I kind of get that. But Tulsa's had success. I still remember the Steve Crackthorpe, then the Todd Graham era. So they can do it. You just need someone who can scrap it out. And perhaps this will be a year where we see some improvement. Again, second season. So, give them one more season. We'll see where it is in year 3. But I like that one. My People's Choice team was actually FAU, the Owls, because I thought, okay, Todd Herman in year 1, he can win. He can do well. He just was not quite what Texas, which is very impatient, was quite ready for. But he managed to go 4-8 and 3-5 in his first season there. There's been lots of transfer activity, but I thought the Owls, if they were to improve this season, I would not be shocked. I think, again, maybe it's because I thought Lane Kiffin hit that perfect note when he was there for that brief moment of just like, how can you not love the Lane train and all that stuff? But FAU is a cute campus. I've been there. It's fun. I always love the way that FAU and FIU, if you know those campuses and look at the map, and especially historically what they used to look like, you can tell it used to be an airfield because of the way the parking lots are set up. I mean, that's where they found room for that stadium on campus. They just plunked it down where there had been one. But I want to also move on. My chaos agent in the American is going to be fun. I thought it's going to be Army because they're just joining the conference. They play their own style of football. So if you're not ready for it, they're going to trip you up. A lot of teams can handle them. If you have enough talent, you can easily handle Army football just based on talent alone. But this is still a conference where these teams are great, but they're not necessarily above, across the board P4 talent. And there might be a team there that gets surprised when they actually have to play the cadets on the field.
No, that's actually the same team that I had as my chaos agent. It's funny, right? Of course, they've had Navy in the conference for a while, and I think Navy's kind of gotten just beaten down in a lot of ways. Army provides a slightly different challenge. They don't run their systems exactly the same, right? Like I think that when you look at Navy, they've been much more of an offensively driven team, whereas I think Army's a little more balanced coming in. And by the way, Brian Newberry, the head coach at Navy now, not the same type of experience as Jeff Monken or as Ken Niumatalolo before him, and I think that showed itself in some ways last season. So Army coming in, I think they absolutely have the ability to go and upset somebody, and potentially throw a wrench into the conversation. And on the high end, sure, like maybe they could get also into that conference title conversation. They've got a weird schedule in some ways because they get Notre Dame, they play Air Force like they always do. Of course, they finish with Navy. They go to FAU. It's like kind of just a weird schedule. It's not one that you feel crazy bad about, but it's not one that you necessarily think is all that manageable either, especially assuming the loss to Notre Dame. So I could see this being a 9-win team in conference in their first season. And like if you get to 9, like you really only have to pull like one more upset to get right into that conference title conversation.
Yeah, I think the Army's a nice team to kind of root for, not just because we love the troops and all that stuff, but just because the expectations there are very reasonable. Like if they can get to a bowl game, I think that they'll be thrilled in their first season in the conference because they don't have to worry about the tie-ins they had, and they probably get more variety in where they get to go bowling. I think it's going to be fun to see how Army works out in all of this. My dark horse, because it's so funny, we kind of worked in the order I wasn't expecting, but my dark horse for the American is actually North Texas. A lot of things have to go the way. Eric Morris's second season there, they barely missed bowl eligibility last season. They were 5-7. They need improvement on defense. They're 131st in the country last season, but Chandler Morris has some potential there as their quarterback, via Oklahoma, via TCU. Curious to see what they can generate there. Schedule wise, at Texas Tech will be a fun one to watch, I think. But again, I'm not. We'll see. They're my we'll see. But I think as far as a dark horse, I wouldn't be shocked if they suddenly climbed into the picture, especially if the quarterback position works.
They were the team that I was debating between two teams for my dark horse, and I ultimately ended up going in the other direction. The thing that I'm a little concerned about with North Texas is why did they just lose so many of their best players? Like why did they basically have a coaching change type of offseason when they did not have a coaching change? I mean, they replaced decently well. They brought in 26 transfers, including some who are pretty exciting. A lot like kind of what I mentioned with some others that like come from the power conferences and maybe are guys who could hit up. Chandler Morris being among them as a quarterback coming in. But like it's just like a little weird to me, the vibe of all these guys just leaving. So I decided to go in a different direction, a similar direction, but a different one. How about them Rice Owls? How about Rice?
Wow.
Uh, Now look, when you're talking about contending for the conference, I don't know that any of the teams that we have available to us are truly going to be able to compete for the conference, but this was a team that made a bowl game last season. They finished 4-4, 6-7 overall, which makes them tied, by the way, with South Florida and Navy for that sort of that middle class of the conference. They did lose Luke McCaffrey at wide receiver, who is just a great player, just a great player. But they tried to backfill. JT Daniels is out. EJ Warner, Kurt Warner's son from Temple, coming in, and he was a good player for them. I actually think it's really impressive that they've just been able to get several transfers to qualify to come to Rice. That is a difficult thing to do if you're Rice, but they did. They brought in some really interesting players. So I don't know. And by the way, too, they rank among the national leaders as well in returning production. So like they're number 5 right now, including number 1 on the defensive side of the ball. So this is really a question of like, can you get a little something from EJ Warner, right? Like, can he give you a little bit of upside? He was one of the only bright spots for Temple last season, a team that we are most definitely not going to be discussing today because of the struggles that they've had under Stan Drayton. He threw for 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, 12 interceptions, and now you put him behind an offensive line with some receivers who are kind of interesting. I think he could be a lot more efficient. I'm intrigued. Again, I don't know if they can win the conference, and maybe North Texas on their high end could win the conference. Like I think that they are that talented, but I think that they are the team out of this group who is most positioned to actually go out and beat some of these really good teams.
Rice is, the more I look at Rice, the more you're selling me on this, only because, well, the remarkable thing is they have almost an identical non-conference schedule. Last season, they lost to UConn. Maybe they can turn that around. They upset Houston, which certainly did not help the Dana Holgerson finale season. They beat Texas Southern, as to be expected. And then, except this season, they trade out Texas for Sam Houston. And suddenly, boy, that seems like there could be, I'm not sure if they'll win them all. Like Houston, though, new head coach, you never know. Willie Fritz might still be a little shaky, but man, imagine if they win out their non-conference. They could be a really interesting team out there. Yeah, I didn't think about the Owls until now. Gosh, that would be a fun one. Mike Bloomgren's a nice guy too. I like what he's done there. And Rice is a school that is patient.
Yes,
they're very patient.
You better be. What you gonna do? You're gonna fire your football coach for quick results? What you're gonna add through the portal?
I still couldn't believe. I mean, I knew they'd reduce the capacity of Rice Stadium over time, so you could see where that part of the stadium is. But then I walked on the concourse, and I'm like, this is literally just like an open concrete space. Like, I kind of was like, I kind of expected a little more. I mean, they built an opera house, a literal opera house on campus a few years ago that cost some insane amount of money because one of their many donors was just like, how much for an opera house? Here you go. I mean, like, why can't you just add like
but like, come on, like it when you're Rice, like you don't move people with football. You move people with the tenors that you can bring to campus. you bring people. You move people by saying, you know what? I bet that we can get some an incredible performance of Carmen to come through here. Like, well, you're gonna
have Carmen at halftime.
Yeah, exactly.
There's your halftime poll. The HBCUs have their bands. Rice breaks out because they have one of those stupid half-ass scatter bands. Like they have a discount version of the Stanford band. Like you got to then switch to having an opera. Like don't even go in your own direction. Like the Rice Owls, the Singing Owls come out at halftime and do an aria of the ages.
First of all, you're gonna make some Rice band alums very upset because they love that band. But the other piece,
those bands always love themselves.
Yeah, but Rice's bands especially loves themselves. But the other piece is, we got to go like full Savannah Bananas, but instead of like TikTok dances, we got to like stop and do an aria in the middle of the game. It'll be great. Anyway, we've spent like 30 minutes and only gotten through one conference. We got to speed this thing up.
Okay, let's keep on moving. So Conference USA, it's Liberty and Friends is the best way to describe
I don't even know if Friends. I don't know how much.
Yeah, I mean,
like
how many teams are in the conference? Can we call them Liberty and the Seven Dwarves? Or I'm not even sure. But no, they've got Kennesaw State join them now. So I think we've got a full 10 there. But yeah, anyway, so gosh, where to even begin there? To me, the obvious dark horse is Jacksonville State. They first season at FBS, they managed to get into a bowl game because of the lack of bowl teams. Rich Rod is a solid coach. They've got quarterback Logan Smothers taking over for Zion Webb. They've got some good running backs in Anwar Lewis and Ron Wiggins. And they've got a good defense led by ends J-Rock Swain and Chris Hardy. I think if any team is going to knock Liberty out and potentially then find themselves in the conversation, it might be Jacksonville State.
I like it. I like it a lot. Yeah, I had them. I was debating between them and one other team for my dark horse spot. I did end up going with them, and I moved this other team to my dark horse spot. That would be Western Kentucky. it was a step back, right? It was a step back. Things did not go to plan, even though they managed to keep Austin Reed on campus. Defensively, they just did not look physically all that great. But this is a staff that I think that you trust in a lot of ways as well. And again, like they're gonna chuck the rock around, right? Like they're gonna keep it moving. They actually managed to take advantage of another team that I'm sure we're going to talk about later, Texas State, and their complete bungling of their quarterback situation. So TJ Finley is coming to campus to start at quarterback for them. And again, like you just kind of look around and you're like, all right, you feel pretty good about what they're bringing in. You feel pretty good about what they've been. This is a like one of those situations where you just kind of lean on what you know. And we know that Tyson Helton has found ways to figure this out. They're going to spread the ball out. They're going to try and lean on their receivers. Malachi Corley's gone. That's going to be a big loss for them, but you hope that they can make up for it by being a little better around their receivers, unlike last season where they struggled at times. So I still think that this is a really good team. I slotted them ultimately as my chaos agent because I do think that, like you mentioned, Jacksonville State. I mean, like you talk about a coach who we know what to expect, like Rich Rod, man. All he does is come in and he wins. But I think that those are sort of the two teams that I really am going to be keeping a close eye on from a competitiveness perspective.
Yeah, they were I kind of wasn't sure how we were going to define what now we call the People's Champ. So I slid Western Kentucky there as like a team I
Nice.
thought for similar reasons it was a contender. My chaos agent was I decided to go kind of, I'm going to assume the splash of his arrival is going to cause some upsets that are unexpected. And that is Derek Mason being the head coach of Middle
Ooh.
Tennessee. I thought that defense could improve under Mason. So they've got some decent talent here and there. They've got a linebacker with Parker Hughes. They have a quarterback that's coming back. They have a running back, Jaden, I think it's Creddle. So they've got enough talent where, again, I'm not pegging them to be a college football playoff contender, especially because they got to go to Ole Miss. But I think they could be a team that disrupts a little bit, and certainly could steal a win here or there against some teams like a Jacksonville State or maybe even a Liberty that would be shockers. Because Liberty again has to go to Murfreesboro.
Yeah, no, I love that one. I love it a lot. I think that they're a team that this we've seen a movement toward sort of I don't even want to call them retreads, but like second chance type coaches. And I think that a lot of them have worked at the group of five level. So I'm excited to see whether Derek Mason can be the next one. I mean, obviously he knows how to recruit Nashville and around that
I mean,
area.
Rich Rod fits into that category. Rich Rod was
Exactly.
still smarting after the whole Michigan thing.
Oh, 100%. And even you talk about Jerry Kill, who of course was not fired from Minnesota, but left for health reasons. And he managed to come in. He's done an incredible job. Jamie Chadwell wasn't a retread, but he was also an experienced coach who came back. Like we've seen success with it. Now there's also other programs that are trying it right now in Conference USA, notably FIU, right, with Mike McIntyre. And I don't think he actually had a bad first season. They're in a hole, but like I think you're even starting to see some signs of life over there as well. So I like the decision. I like the hire. They're gonna have to try to figure out what they are, independent of Rick Stockstill, but I'm excited to see what it is. My people's champion. Honestly, the reason that I created this category of people's champion was I wanted to talk about UTEP, man. UTEP made a fun hire with Scotty Walden coming in from Austin P. People might remember him. Actually, they might really remember him from when he was a 26-year-old who got a Vice article called "The Youngest Coach in College Football" when he was an assistant coach at East Texas Baptist, or sorry, a head coach at East Texas Baptist, and ultimately made his way up to being the interim coach at Southern Miss. Ultimately, made his way up to being at Austin Peay. Now at UTEP, and it is impossible to express how much energy that they have brought to this program. Their previous coaching staff, I think, did a pretty solid job under Dana Dimmel. They managed to get to a bowl game. They managed to be competitive for bowl games other seasons at a really, really tough place to coach. But they were always sort of a like move in silence type of staff. And when you're in El Paso in this sort of like football starved desert in a lot of ways, you have to find ways to engage the community. And I think that Scotty Walden's done that. I've heard in short order from like people around high schools and recruiting that they can't believe how much more often they see UTEP staffers come through. And the other thing too is that like Scotty Walden schematically is a really smart guy. He loves to pick up the tempo. He loves to make things happen. Like he knows how to kind of simulate pressure and simulate speed. So I mean, I think that he's just a really smart coach too. And he's bringing a quarterback too from Austin P and Skylar Locklear. We don't necessarily know who's going to be the starter over there, but to have somebody who has familiarity and actually a number of players coming with him from Austin P who he thinks can play at this level, I think that that's a great place to start. So again, UTEP's probably not going to win a lot of games this upcoming season, but they're a program that I think that's doing some stuff that's pretty fun, and I'm excited to see if any of it works.
No, I like that. I could see them making a couple of surprise splashes, especially with that coach. Let's go ahead and kind of wrap up. Actually, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk about the three other G5s as we discuss who might be a contender, an outside contender, here on the College Football Survivor Show.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.
All right, so as we kind of look at the back half of our sort of G5 plus independence program, the MAC. Now, they were, for me, one of the hardest ones to look at because the MAC has always been a very kind of like the teams tend to bunch close together. There are some teams that are better than others, but generally there's basically a top half and a bottom half year after year. Now, we had Toledo as the one team that we put in our 9 teams that were the highest contenders. And we kind of had this conversation the last second we decided to actually pull one out of what had been a 10-team list. And that was a team that I'm going to go ahead and just throw out there as my dark horse, which is Miami of Ohio. Now, Chuck Martin, he's been there forever. I didn't even think, when I was looking at this, I'm like, wow, he's been there 11 seasons now. They went last season 11-3, 7-1 in the MAC. They upset Toledo in the MAC championship. They fell to an App State team in the Cure Bowl, but other than that, last season, I believe they had a great season overall. Now, this season, they lost their running back, Rashad Amos, to Ole Miss. They lost their star wide receiver to South Carolina. They've brought in a running back, Dylan Dowling, from Purdue. They're returning their quarterback, Brett Gabbert, and 2 of their 3 leading receivers are also still there. So they have some talent, and 2 of their top 3 tacklers as well. They get to open their season. I love it. I want to just call them Northwestern on the Lake now because they're going to be the team that gets to stress test this temporary stadium they're building on the lacrosse field that is literally right at the edge of Lake Michigan. I hope it's an extremely windy day because that'll be glorious. That thing is literally at an elbow joint. It is going to be blasted by wind. They have their typical rivalry with Cincy, and then they have a tough order and they play at Notre Dame. But conference-wise, the toughest game they have, because they actually play both of the top contenders. They play at Toledo, and then they host Northern Illinois. And when we've been talking about the potential MAC contenders, those 3, at least this season, in the preseason, seem to be the leaders. I think they could be the chance. I think if any team knocks off Toledo, it's probably going to be Miami at this point.
No, that's the right pick. Like you mentioned, they were like kind of our last cut when it came to including teams on the playoff contender list. It's just a lot for them, I think, to get into the legitimate playoff contender mold. The reason that I decided to include Toledo was because I think on the high end, they could go like 12-0. I think that Miami could win the conference at like 10-2, and 2 losses in the MAC. I just don't think is going to get it done, especially when you look at in non-conference Northwestern, Cincinnati, Notre Dame. I think that they're probably looking at 1-2 in that group. So all that said, though, like this might be, I mean, some people consider them to be the MAC preseason favorite. Of course, like you mentioned, bringing Gabbert back, and like Chuck Martin's just trucking along there, isn't he, man? Like he just keeps on moving. He just keeps on winning. I don't love the fact that they just lost Rashad Amos, who was a huge player for them, right? Like that's one that I really wish that they had managed to hang on to, but that's kind of just life these days in the Mid-American Conference, especially. Like it's a battle of attrition, and Miami had a little bit of attrition, but not devastating attrition. So I think you just have to take that if you're Miami. Um, but overall, I think that this is a more complete team than most, and I'm going to be fascinated to see if they can ultimately find a way to come in and keep things kind of trekking along. The other thing too, especially when you talk about the MAC, is that it is so hard to figure out who is still on these teams. Like you have to go deep into the weeds to try to figure out, are these guys between COVID years, between transfers? You have no idea who's still on these rosters. But I think that Miami is the one that you have to trust more than most. Moving on to my chaos agent, I think a team that that kind of has been inconsistent the past few years, but I think has the ability to move back into that top group. I'd have to go with Northern Illinois. I think that Northern Illinois is a team. Last year they go 6-6, but finished with a winning record in conference play. They're one who I think is set up in a nice kind of way. They didn't lose too much in the transfer portal, which again, like it's a battle of attrition. You take whatever you can get. And so I do think that that also when you look at like returning production, they're 45th nationally in returning production, top 25 on the defensive side of the ball. I think that Thomas Hammock has had kind of his opportunity to come in and build things up and try to find some long-term pieces, and they've done a decent job of retention. So I think that NIU is probably the team that is most well positioned to compete with Miami and with Toledo.
I agree that they are certainly the team that is most likely to compete with them. They unfortunately also have the same issue that Miami does, in that their non-conference includes at Notre Dame and at NC State, which are going to be two that I doubt we're going to see them even split. But yeah, no, they, as you said, they kept some talent. They have Rasheed Thomas and Jaden Dolphin, two of their top receivers back. They've got Ontario Brown, who ran for nearly 1,300 yards last season. And their defense has not been bad. Their lead tacklers are back, and they were allowing just under 22 points, which is great for a MAC team. So I think it's so funny too, because this has just had to do with also definitions. I wasn't sure where to place them. I consider my people's champ, but I was defining them as like the third team. Because my chaos agent for the conference was Ohio. And the reason is they lost a ton of people to the portal. Like, I think one of the worst, because that's the problem. They were successful. They went 10-3, 6-2 under Tim Albin, and the Myrtle Beach Bowl champions. So they lost at least 5 names to the portal. We'll see who the quarterback's going to be. I know they have CJ Harris or Parker Navarro. They do have a good running back with Ricky Hunt. I think they have the talent and the ability to upset some teams, particularly some of these other 3 that we were just talking about. But I think they'll need another season or 2 to develop into another contender again. I mean, Ohio, Frank Solich left a good system there when he stepped down. So I think it'll be interesting to see again how the Bobcats continue and how they go into it. But I think this season I'm just going to consider them an upset machine.
No, I mean I like it. Like it's just it's so hard, right? Like it is so hard to know with these teams that lost so much. I mean, we've had this conversation before on the Colorado front of like when you are having these rosters of guys who have never really played before, you don't know what to expect. That's kind of most of the MAC at this point. It is just that kind of year, and I mean that kind of conference. Unfortunately, heading forward, I think that if you're the MAC right now, you are looking for any way possible to come in and try to like find ways just to slow player movement. I'm going to pick a people's champion based off of one exciting player to keep an eye on, and that would be Jalen Buckley at Western Michigan. Rushed for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns as a freshman. Also had 161 yards through the air. Sometimes that's just what it takes, right? Like in the MAC, like sometimes you just got a dude, and he just does stuff. Now, the question is whether he like still has any body left after playing at Wisconsin and at Ohio State in the first 2 weeks of his season. But if they make it through those games, if they survive Marshall 2 weeks later, like sure, I think that he's the kind of player who can swing a game or two and potentially be potentially the best running back in the MAC, one of the best offensive players in the MAC. So I'm excited to see what he can become. I love being able to kind of see these guys who are great freshmen stick around, and that's going to be harder than ever when you talk about the MAC.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's keep on moving to the Mountain West. Now, this was the conference I actually had the hardest time trying to sort out contenders because we've talked about this. We had Boise State and Fresno State last week or last episode, pardon me. And those are two solid programs. That leaves us with a question of who else could be out there. Now, my dark horse candidate, I think the team that could potentially win it all could be UNLV, but there's the big question was Jaden Mayava. He's now going to be presumably, well, he's in contention, I guess, technically, but he's out in the USC roster now. They went 9-5, which blew everyone away. Barry Odom, again, just, we're talking about retread coaches. There's a coach who suddenly surprised everyone when he got there. I mean, they went 6-2 in the Mountain West. They do return some talent. They have their top receiver, Ricky White III, who received for 88 catches and over 1,400 yards last season. They have a veteran offensive tackle in Tiger Shanks. They return most of the defense. They have a tough but not impossible non-conference schedule. I think that's part of it. Houston, new head coach. Willie Fritz is great, but again, maybe you can get him off, take him off. They actually have a rematch of their bowl game by playing Kansas. That'll be a tough one because, again, a lot of folks are hot on Kansas. Syracuse, new head coach. Oregon State, new head coach. Well, golly gee, who knows what they could do there? So I think depending on who we see emerge as the quarterback, and that's a big if because Mayava was something special as a freshman. I'm curious to see how UNLV will look. And again, I'm excited. I just love that UNLV is even in the conversation. I love them because I love Vegas, and I'm just glad that they have a team there that is worth watching.
No, I love it. I think that they are the obvious dark horse team. I really wish that we could have just kept them as like a legit contender, but when they lost so much, of course, of the transfer portal after their fantastic season, it's just hard to truly project what to expect from them. They have some guys competing for that quarterback position, but none who you feel amazing about. But this is for all the talk about their quarterback. This is a run-based offense, and they've got several of their running backs back, along with, of course, like you mentioned, Ricky White, who is a big time player at wide receiver. Moving on to my chaos agent. We refer to them as sort of a perennial contender in the Mountain West, except for that they lost every player that they had. But like, how can you count out Air Force, right? Like, how can you count out that program and that system? They've managed to take obviously the option and modernize it in so many ways. I actually think that more programs should be running variations of what they do offensively, spreading things out, playing out of the shotgun. And you could still pass off those concepts, but like just try some stuff. I think that their staff has done such an incredible job. The thing that makes them chaos is that like, who are these people? Who's going to be playing for them? Who can they lean on? They had such good skill talent. They had such good skill talent last season, and a quarterback in Zach Larrier who was a legitimate difference maker for them, and they're going to have to learn how to live without. So, I just think that you feel like, all right, we're gonna trust what's going on here. We're gonna have faith that they can figure it out, but that puts them more in a chaos agent category for me than being in that dark horse group.
Yeah, this is the one conference where I had a real tough time picking between two teams. And Air Force was one of my potential chaos agents because, again, it's hard to define what they're going to be like. I'm going to go with my other one then really quick, and that's San Diego State, only because it's Sean Lewis, a lot of respect for his coaching ability. Obviously, the whole Colorado fiasco was a thing in itself, but San Diego State always has the ability to stack a decent amount of talent, and they nearly made it into what was a dying Pac-12. So again, they were on that. No team in a year has been just so like, what the hell happened as San Diego State? Because we remember they were about to join. They really kind of angered the rest of the Mountain West by saying, we're thinking about leaving in a month. Their commissioner said, all right, you're leaving in a month. And they're like, no, we're not. And then the whole conference blew up. So I think there's still enough talent in the cupboard that they could at least be a chaos agent. I don't know if Sean Lewis is going to turn them around immediately, but if San Diego State starts knocking off some contenders, no one's going to be shocked about it. But I'll go then to my kind of people's choice bonus team. And they're not a team I'd be shocked if they did well. That's Colorado State. Maybe they're going to automatically be the people's choice on week 3 when they play Colorado again after last season's wild game that they played together. They start the season at Texas, so that's going to be a pretty brutal call there. But that Colorado game is going to be exciting, and the rest of their schedule, they'll always be in it. It is remarkable that Jay Norvell hasn't quite made it to a bowl yet, especially after they poached him from Nevada and that really kind of weird interconference stuff. But I think Norvell has got the team in the right direction. I like the team. I'm very curious to see where they work out. So they're going to be my people's team.
No, I think that's a great choice. I actually had them as well as my People's Champion. I was debating, ironically, for my People's Champion, how exactly I was going to make Colorado fans mad, whether I was going to pick Sean Lewis or whether I was going to pick Colorado State. I ultimately did decide to go with Colorado State. They got a quarterback in Braden Fowler-Nicolosi, who I think is just like, he is just executing that system at a much higher level than he was early in his career. Somehow Torrey Horton is back. I don't know why. He is a really good receiver for them. Dylan Goffney as well, a former SMU receiver who I think has a lot of upside. So there is such desire, I think, in this program to finally put it all together. When you look at the number of upperclassmen and even graduate players and 6th-year seniors on both sides of the ball, I think that this is a team that could just have everything come together and have a special year. And the ironic thing about all of these returns is like, I don't want to make too much of it, but like, the chance to rematch Colorado has to be a huge part of why so many of these players are back, right? Like that has to be, I'm not saying it's the deciding factor by any means, but like they know what it did for their individual brands. They know what it would mean for this program. That the game is set to be played in Fort Collins for the first time in a long time. I can't remember.
It's been a long time. They used to do in Denver, and now, It's been a while.
So like this is going to be on campus in Fort Collins. It's going to be obviously the biggest game in many years. So it was in Fort Collins
since 1996. 96.
So it looks like they played once in 2015 actually in Fort Collins. And then before that it was 1996. Although I don't know, maybe Winsipedia might be wrong about the 2015 game. So but point is, it does not happen very often to play this game right in Fort Collins. So I'm excited to see it. And like, again, when the air raid works, like it can work. Like it can work. It can cause issues. And we've come to a point right now, especially in the Mountain West, by the way, where teams aren't really running that anymore. You don't practice defending that the same way. This isn't a couple years ago. This isn't, Conference USA. This isn't the Big 12 where there's all these teams who have run stuff with air raid concepts in it. It's kind of a zag in some ways. And we even saw with Jay Norvell at Nevada when he had that quarterback in Carson Strong, excuse me. There's Carson Steele, Carson Strong. Too many guys with similar names. Like it can really work. And I think that he might have that guy who's starting to gain the experience in Braden Fowler-Nicolosi. So we'll see what happens, man. I know that we'll all be watching it, hopefully at a more appropriate time in week 3. And by the way, I do have to say too, so it's a 6:30 Central Time start. We're both Central Time. It's actually going to be on CBS, my network, because Colorado State, as a member of the Mountain West, has a contract with CBS Sports Network, so they were able to flex that game to CBS. So we're going to be the biggest winners of that weekend.
Oh yeah, that would have been a must-have. Every network wants that game. And again, the Dion effect, baby. That's what we can say. Let's wrap this up by talking about the Sun Belt, and they are an interesting one. I'm going to just say I'm pretty sure we both have the same dark horse. It's got to be Texas State.
It's gotta be.
Yeah, because GJ Kinney's just working wonders in that first season. Got them in their first ever bowl game. They brought in James Madison's quarterback. How rare do you see the conference player of the year, Jordan McLeod, go to transfer to another team in the same conference? Like, that was the most remarkable thing. One of the most remarkable portal stories. But yeah, they've got to be it. I think they have every opportunity to be that contender.
No, I think so too. For me, like, this is just a staff that I think has done such a great job of identifying and putting guys into good positions. And like we talked about before, they nearly bungled this thing with their quarterback situation, letting TJ Finley go, taking a flyer on Jaden Delora, who ended up having some off-field stuff that needed to get resolved in the legal system, and they are so lucky that Jordan McLeod ended up being available, so they might have actually upgraded the position long term. So look, I think that this is a program that is on the upswing. I think that GJ Kinney very soon is going to be one of those coaches who's considered for higher level jobs. And again, like, they continued to succeed both in high school and transfer recruiting. They signed 17 high school players, and they also brought in a top 60 transfer class, which is fantastic for a Sun Belt program. So I think that you have to feel good about where this program is at. I thought about including them in our contender group, but ultimately decided against it because I think that it's just a little bit too much of a leap for them to get up to that 11 win plateau. But I mean, if this is an 8 or 9 win team, again, going into the final few weeks of the season, I'm excited to see what they could be.
They certainly don't have an impossible schedule. I mean, Arizona State's a very weak team this season, so that's a good draw. UTSA is a rivalry game, so we'll see where that goes. But yeah, the rest of their schedule is very, very reasonable. So if this team can come together, I think we're going to see some great improvement. Certainly another bowl game on their horizon. So the chaos agent for me was also easy, because James Madison can't go into the college football playoffs. So a really great team that is completely, all they can do is just spoil everybody else's season and maybe win the conference, which would be even more delightful, because then that would totally block them out. So the only question there, obviously there's been a changing of the guard. They now have Bob Chesney, a great coach from Holy Cross, who's now going to be their new head coach there. But Kurt Cignetti is now at Indiana. What do we make of them?
Great question. No, this is still a team that you have to feel is going to be competitive with everybody in the conference. I think that Kurt Cignetti also did know there was a changing of the guard of sorts with a lot of big time players leaving this program for them. They actually, in returning production, they're down at 123rd, including 126th on the defensive side of the ball. So I don't think they're going to be as dominant as they were. And I think that you look at some rating systems, some of them do think that this could be a program that is as dominant as they were last season, even though there was a coaching change. Bob Chesney is a coach who figures things out. Like, that is what he does more than anything else. And I think that, I mean, you talk about being at Holy Cross and being at some of, Salve Regina and programs like that have absolutely zero resources for football. Like, to come in to the investment that James Madison has, like, you got to feel great about that, right? Like, I think long term, this is another one where I think that maybe we're a year or two away from seeing all of this come together. And yes, they were. I actually had them as my people's champion because I didn't really know where to put them, especially after last season and their strange place in the pecking order because of their lack of eligibility. For my chaos agent, I decided to go back to a more traditional team. I'm curious. I'm curious what Arkansas State is, man. Like, I'm a little curious, and maybe I should have switched these two and made Arkansas State the people's champion. But like, they kind of got something. Like, they're kind of interesting. They managed to build their way up to being a bowl team last season after, dear God, looking like a total disaster in the opener against Oklahoma. And now they return a decent amount. They bring in another strong transfer class. Timmy McClain as a quarterback coming in to compete. Like, they've slowly built up their level of talent. I mean, I even look at adding a player like Malik Hornsby, a converted quarterback to wide receiver, one of the fastest players I think he'll be in the Sun Belt. Micaiah Overton from Texas A&M coming in, another big time player. Like, there's just all these little guys, all these little pieces that I think you need to keep an eye on when it comes to Arkansas State. And from a talent perspective, I think that you could make the case that Arkansas State is going to be a top 3 to 5 talent team in the Sun Belt in 2024. So it hasn't yet come together, but I don't think that means that it won't come together.
Butch Jones, I still remember when he was the Central Michigan head coach and the Cincinnati head coach, and Tennessee eventually kind of wore out his welcome. But sometimes, again, I'm a big believer that some of these guys are really good at building up some of the smaller teams, like a Central Michigan and a Cincy in the era that he was there. That you get what's called the Peter principle, where you get promoted to the point where you're incompetent at what you do, and that's maybe what happened when he got to Tennessee, where it's a different type of program to run. And then maybe Arkansas State, because we've seen improvement. I agree. Like the first week last season, we're like, well, Butch is a dead man walking. And no, he wasn't. He somehow managed to pull it together. But I could see that. My bonus team, or my people's team, is also a traditional Sun Belt team, and that's Louisiana's Ragin' Cajuns, because they have a reasonable schedule. Like their non-conference is Grambling State, Kennesaw State, Tulane, we've talked about before, and Wake Forest, all winnable games. They generally recruit well enough to be a solid enough program. They haven't seen the success they were hoping for and what they were led to expect, because they had frankly, Louisiana was awful for a long time. Back when they were, Louisiana Lafayette, like they got addicted to that level of success. But I think this slate is one that is manageable enough that, who knows, maybe I'm going to root for them, because I just like Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns. I just love the Ragin'. I kind of a little pretentious about dropping the Lafayette part, but I still think that I'm still going to root for them. So they're going to be my people's team.
I think that the rule when it comes to Louisiana is that if they are convincingly the best of the Sun Belt teams, if they're up there, then they get to be Louisiana. If Louisiana Tech competes with them, then sorry, you're Louisiana Lafayette again. Like if Louisiana Monroe gets to your level.
Do you know that, because they were originally a directional name school along with Monroe? Do you know why there was not originally a University of Louisiana, at least as of in the modern era?
So I thought that it was just because what's his name, the governor Huey Newton put all the resources towards Louisiana State. Is there more to it?
It is the only situation where a state institution went private. There was a University of Louisiana, and it was the state premier institution in New Orleans, and the Civil War nearly bankrupted them. So a mercantile store guy gave them a bunch of money, and they made it the Tulane University of Louisiana, which it still says on the seal. And it's the only time a public university of that size went private. And so therefore, that was why there was never, for the longest time, never a distinct University of Louisiana. And that's why they kind of went like, whoever the marketing guy was at these schools, like, you know what? Let's just fill that space. And I'm sure Louisiana State's like, you were what? But that's what left LSU as the premier state program in the public state program in the state.
And of course, to be clear, the former Black Panther leader was not the governor of Louisiana. I'm of course thinking of Huey Long, not Huey Newton.
Let's make it even more mega. Huey Lewis in the news? No. You stop talking.
We're gonna get ourselves in a lot of trouble if we keep saying anything.
Oh my goodness. Oh, well, that was a lot of teams. My goodness. If we didn't include your team, sorry, they're not in contention. If somehow we didn't name the team, and bless you, Akron, if this is your year, I will cheer for you all the way. But I think at this point, if we haven't named the G5 in the last 2 episodes, if we haven't named the G5 contender, I don't know what to say. We're charlatans. Oh my goodness. Well, I think we've been on this long enough. I just wanted to thank all of you for listening. I wanted to thank our producer, Joey Aliberti. Be sure to like, rate, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast. Tell your friends. We love meeting new people on this. So you can find us on X and TikTok at CFB Survivor Show. He's Shehan Jayaraja. You can find his work at CBSSports.com. I'm Bobak Kyrie, part of the group that runs Reddit CFB. Thank you.
The College Football Survivor Show, where playoff survival is always on the line.